Imagine an airplane that quietly reshaped how people moved, how nations fought, how relief reached isolated towns. Not the flashiest, not the fastest, but endlessly useful. The Douglas DC-3 and its military cousin was C-47. Over the course of nearly a century, this design turned up in theaters of war and fields of peace, on glacier ice and coral atolls, helping define what effective airlift looks like. Today I'll trace that story: design impact, battlefield performance, civilian reinvention, and the way aviators of today are preserving and remembering this workhorse. In the early 1930s, passenger flight was unreliable and expensive. Aircraft construction still mixed wood, fabric, and metal. Routes favored mail contracts over passenger needs, and airlines survived on government subsidies more than revenue generated from moving people. Transforming air travel from a novelty to a business required an airplane that balanced economy and comfort against performance and maintainability. Donald Douglas and the Douglas Aircraft Company took that brief seriously. The plane he and his engineers produced did not win attention by a single flashy innovation. It succeeded because they measured every trade-off and favored reliability and serviceability. The Douglas Sleeper Transport, or DST, that evolved into the DC-3 first flew on December 17, 1935, intentionally echoing the anniversary of the Wright brothers' first flight. That symbolic date underscored a practical revolution. The DC-3 combined an all-metal, semi-monocoque fuselage, efficient wing design, retractable landing gear, and reliable Pratt & Whitney radial engines. The cabin was heated and reasonably comfortable. None of those components individually were earth-shattering, but together they produced an aircraft that could actually make money carrying passengers, an industry-level shift. By the late 1930s, the DC-3 was the backbone of global passenger and mail networks, accounting for almost 90% of the world's airlines' fleets. Used by airlines from KLM to Qantas, from Pan Am to TWA, its reliability enabled timetables, regular maintenance cycles, and passenger confidence. In short order, the DC-3 turned flying from an adventurous option to a practical means of intercity travel. As war clouds loomed across the world, the DC-3 was a natural choice for military use. The C-47 Skytrain retained 80% of the DC-3's bones but gained reinforced flooring, large cargo doors, tow fittings, and provisions for paratroopers. These changes would convert a passenger workhorse into a logistics giant, able to haul vehicles, troops, and medical evacuees, sometimes in and out of places without proper airfields. Nicknames followed: Dakota to the British, Goonie Bird to the U.S. crews. The Goonie Bird's operational record is vast, but a few missions can highlight its importance. On June 6, 1944, nearly 900 C-47s dropped paratroopers and towed gliders into Normandy, low, dark, and under fire. In Sicily and Italy, the aircraft supported large airborne assaults. In the China-Burma-India theater, crews braved the hump, flying over the Himalayas where weather and terrain were as dangerous as any enemy. In every theater, the C-47 delivered the one thing armies can't fight without: supplies. Not just beans, bombs, and bullets, but bringing replacement troops in and evacuating wounded out of the battlefields around the world. In June of 1948, the Cold War turned from tense diplomacy into an immediate humanitarian crisis. On the 24th, Soviet authorities blockaded all road, rail, and canal links to West Berlin, an attempt to force the Western Allies out by starving the city of food, fuel, and essentials. Faced with a city that only had weeks of coal and food on hand, the Allies launched a bold experiment: keep Berlin alive by air. Less than 48 hours after the blockade began, C-47 Skytrains were already flying into Tempelhof and Gatow. On that first emergency day, U.S. crews made dozens of flights, moving more than 80 tons of provisions into the city, a stopgap that bought time while planners scaled up the operation. The C-47's strengths, ruggedness, short field capability, and crew familiarity made it ideal for that opening period and for missions into smaller airfields. But the Skytrain's relatively small cargo capacity limited how much coal and bulk fuel it could carry per sortie. As the airlift evolved, larger transports, especially the C-54 Skymaster, handled the steady stream of heavy cargo, while C-47s continued to perform vital feeder flights, shuttle runs, and missions into narrower, more confined airfields. At its height, the airlift became an extraordinary logistical achievement. Over the 15-month operation, Allied aircraft completed almost 560,000 flights and delivered about 2.3 million tons of food, coal, fuel, and supplies, enough to keep a city of millions alive until surface access resumed. On April 16, 1949, U.S. and British aircraft set a one-day record by delivering 12,941 tons. The Berlin airlift showed how airlift, and aircraft like the C-47 could turn strategy into life-saving logistics. Among the thousands of flights and crews, one young lieutenant's small humane gesture became an enduring symbol. On 18th of July, 1948, Lieutenant Gale Halverson noticed children gathering at the end of Tempelhof runway. Touched by their curiosity and hunger for a sign of normal life, he promised he would wiggle his wings as a signal and then drop candy tied to tiny parachutes made from handkerchiefs. The children called him Uncle Wiggly Wings, and the story spread quickly. What began as a handful of improvised airdrops soon became Operation Little Vittles. Halverson's commanding officers ultimately embraced the idea. Pilots pooled candy rations. Civilians back home, including school children and candy manufacturers, began sending supplies, and other aircrews joined in. By the end of the airlift, pilots had dropped roughly 250,000 small parachutes and on the order of 24 tons of candy. A small gesture in tonnage, but immense in morale and public relations. Colonel Halverson became a symbol of the renewed friendship between the U.S. and Germany. When the colonel passed in February of 2022, the German government sent representatives to his funeral and passed on letters of appreciation to his family from the President of Germany and the Mayor of Berlin. Beyond the headlines are countless small acts of ingenuity. Maintainers patching battle damage with sheet metal, loadmasters improvising cargo nets, and pilots learning short field techniques that let a C-47 leave a coral atoll with barely enough runway. That human operating capability, people who knew the airplane intimately, made the design useful under pressure. The Skytrain's forgiving operational capability and its rugged construction were as important as its cargo capacity. The C-47's contribution to winning World War II cannot be overstated. When asked what weapons were most important to the Allies' victory, General Eisenhower listed the C-47 alongside the Jeep, the bulldozer, the bazooka, and ultimately the atomic bomb. While only 607 civilian DC-3s were built from 1936 to 1943, production of the C-47 exceeded 16,000. This includes over 10,000 aircraft built by the U.S., almost 5,000 built by the USSR, and ironically, 500 built by Japan between 1939 and 1945. Japan had acquired the license to build the aircraft from Douglas in 1938. After 1945 and the end of World War II, thousands of surplus C-47s flooded the market. Entrepreneurs and small airlines snapped them up. In remote regions, they did what jets couldn't: operate from short, rough strips, carry bulky cargo, and be fixed by local mechanics. They enabled development, airlifting mining gear into the Andes, bringing medics to Arctic settlements, delivering mail to island communities. The DC-3's second life arguably expanded its cultural footprint even more widely than its first. Rather than fading into retirement, many DC-3s and C-47s were upgraded. Turboprop conversions improved reliability and performance, extended fuselages added capacity, and modern avionics made for safer operations. The C-47's airframe was so adaptable it even became the basis for new combat roles, notably the AC-47's spooky gunship in Vietnam, which demonstrated how a tired airframe could be reimagined decades after it first flew. The DC-3's cultural significance spurred a preservation movement. Restorers and volunteers tracked down old parts, patched corrosion, and sometimes replaced entire sections to bring airframes back to flying condition. These restorations require funding, niche skills, and often years of dedication. The result, a flying museum piece, becomes a living classroom where visitors can connect to the sensory realities of flight. The smell of oil, the vibration of the radial engines, and the tactile feel of a heavy control yoke. One notable example of preservation is the C-47 that now sits on display at the Travis Air Force Base Aviation Museum in Fairfield, California. The museum's C-47A, serial number 4292990, flew combat operations in the Mediterranean, North Africa, and Italy during World War II. This aircraft was generously donated to the museum by Duncan Miller. Today, it's a key artifact in the museum's collection and a tangible link between the local communities and the larger sweep of air mobility history. Moving a large aircraft into place is often a daunting logistical puzzle. For the Travis C-47, the solution was dramatic. The airframe was airlifted from Nuttry Airport in Vacaville, suspended below a California Army National Guard CH-47 Chinook helicopter. As the line chief at Travis Air Force Base, I was part of the team that planned the operational and logistical requirements for the move. The initial attempt to move the aircraft failed. We had carefully weighed the C-47 and determined it was within the lift capacity of the CH-47. What we didn't take into account was the force of the rotor wash on the wings of the C-47. Eventually, volunteers removed the propellers and the outboard sections of the wings, allowing the lift to proceed. On December 6, 2006, the Chinook successfully airlifted the fuselage to Travis Air Force Base, where it was towed to its permanent display position. Even today, in a world of jets and composite airframes, the DC-3's descendants keep working where conditions demand simplicity and ruggedness. Remote mining operations, scientific campaigns in polar regions, and short-field cargo routes. As of 2025, over 160 DC-3 C-47s remain airworthy and flying, a testament to an airframe whose life was extended by sensible engineering and continual reinvention. The story of the DC-3 and its military cousin, the C-47, is not merely one of rivets and engines. It's a story of logistics becoming strategy, of ordinary crews turning routine flights into extraordinary acts. From the earliest passenger routes that made the timetables possible, to the beaches of Normandy and the treacherous Hump, from the quiet grime of Arctic bush strips to the high-tempo corridors over a blockaded Berlin, the DC-3 family kept the world moving. It was never the flashiest airplane. It didn't break speed records or win headline honors. Its victory was quieter. It kept things working when everything else threatened to stop. It delivered paratroopers, coal, and candy. It medevaced the wounded, kept remote towns alive, and enabled economies to open where rails and roads couldn't. The very measure of its success is that it became indispensable in ways the original designers might never have imagined. Today, when you run your hand alongside a restored DC-3's skin or stand underneath the C-47 at the Travis Museum, you feel the scale of that usefulness. An airframe that was built to do a simple job and to do it so reliably that nations came to depend on it. That's a rare kind of greatness. The DC-3 and the C-47 did not simply move cargo and people. They carried ideas of connection, of rescue, of endurance, across oceans and over borders. So when you walk past a museum placard, when you hear the radial engines warm up at an air show, remember this. The true legacy of the DC-3 is not in its metal or its mileage. It's the places it kept open, the lives it saved, and the fact when history required movement, whether to ferry a family, supply a city, or turn the tide of war, this humble design kept flying. That's why, long after other machines are gone, the DC-3 still matters.